make Presbyterians move is impossible.
I know.
But the
Yeah.
closer they are, the better they'll be able to read.
True. Closer they are and bunched together, the better they'll be able to read. So y'all want to come forward if you need to. If not, that's fine. We just want to make sure you can see it. Right. We're glad to see you. I think we're mostly family and friends here. And so Andy needs no introduction. We will, I think Andy will take a break. He's due to go to about 11:30. He'll take a break. We've got some water out there. We ask that you not bring coffee or anything into the sanctuary. Where's Ann Weir? Oh, there she is. That's right. That's right. It's water. It's water. I've got a story about this red cup, but I'll spare you. Some of you have heard it. Welcome. We're glad to see you. We're glad you're here. We're all family. Andy enlightens us. He raises our spirits at times, which the last few times he's done one on glass, and he's done one on some ancient art and architecture and archaeology and all that, and that raises our spirits and raises our insights. Today we're here to raise your minds and to give you hopefully some background on the Zionist movement, because it's happening as we see it right in front of us today, and we need to know more. We're not afraid of issues. We engage them reasonably and honestly and openly and try to understand them. I know there's probably any number of feelings politically about Zionism in here, but this isn't a political presentation. It's a factual presentation about the history and the people and the movement, and we'll leave it up to you and your hearts and minds to decide what you need to decide about those facts and things. But we're grateful for Andy. We're grateful for his scholarship, and let's open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time together. We're grateful for this day that you have made for us to rejoice and be glad in. You've also given us hearts and minds to seek and to learn and to yearn for you and for knowledge of you. So we give you our thanks. We ask that by your Holy Spirit you will hover over us this day. Give us wisdom, give us insight, give us knowledge that leads ultimately to your goodness, grace, and love in this world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, am I on? Thank you, Keith. I appreciate it. Thank you for opening up, Bill. Pretty important topic to discuss, I think. Bill and I were having a conversation about some possibilities. I suggested this one. I said we can only have friends here because it's so complicated, and so argued about these days that you want to start with goodwill, which I know that we have here among ourselves. So I thank you for that. If I say something or something comes up and you don't like it, blame me, not Bill, for this. Okay, so as you look at the screen, friends, Theodor Herzl is a name that many of you will know, and I'm kind of an old-fashioned person on many things, so I like a biographical approach on many issues. So it's not just statistics, and it's not just historical trends, though we'll talk a lot about both of those things, but how a particular person at a particular moment in history was quite influential. You'll see there in the subtitle, he was a journalist, a Zionist, and this quotation from the Declaration of Independence in the modern state of Israel, that he was the, quote, spiritual father of the Jewish state. And then a quotation from a historian, whether that's right or not, it just tells you that at a moment in time, he was a very influential person. I'm going to start this morning with that term Zionist. We'll look at where it originated. In fact, that'll be a major thing that we'll do this morning. Just where did it come from? And we'll look at the times in which it arose. There's a term that develops at exactly the same time, and you will know it, anti-Semitism. So the term Zionism and anti-Semitism developed at approximately the same time, 19th century Europe. So what I'll do for the first 30 minutes or so is kind of set that stage. And we'll look at the origins of these terms and so forth. And then I'll introduce you to Herzl. We'll take a break, and we'll be done 11:15 to 11:30. Fair enough? Okay. Can I have a smile? Thank you. Well, if I don't get into trouble today, I'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place. Yeah, thanks, Bill. Okay, now, it's black and white. That's why I say, hope you can read some of this. The term Zion, it goes back to the Bible, what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. For our purposes, it's simply a synonym for Jerusalem. And you expand from that, but that's the takeaway here. That second bullet point, just for a moment, let's look at it. David captured the stronghold of Zion, comma, that is the city of David. That explanatory comment at the end is part of the text. That's not something that I put there. That's the way it is translated there in 2 Samuel. And the city of David, Jerusalem, and Zion are different names for the same place. I won't go through these other quotes. You will recognize them. But just remember, Zion equals Jerusalem, Jerusalem equals Zion. Now, with this group, let's go down to that last bullet point there, the New Jerusalem. And the way that the book of Revelation ends, it is, let's put it to you this way, the largest portrait of what redeemed life looks like in the New Testament. You know, it's quite picturesque, it's quite symbolic. And what has happened as the Old Testament develops and in the birth of Christianity, this understanding of Jerusalem as the center of God's self-revelation then expands to define a whole community. It could be hundreds of miles, square miles, and so forth. So when you say Zion, what you're really saying is Jerusalem. And Zionism is rooted in that context. Okay. What is Zionism? Don't trust my definition. I took this right off of the website of the Jewish Center for Justice so that I would not make a mistake. So what is Zionism? Zionism is the belief of the Jewish people's right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland. It affirms that Jews, like all peoples, have the right to live in safety, dignity, and sovereignty in a nation of their own. I know that you can read. Who popularized Zionism? You can see why I've done my presentation with Herzl. While the connection to the land of Israel dates back thousands of years, Theodor Herzl helped formalize and globalize the modern Zionist movement, which ultimately led to the establishment of the state of Israel. What does it mean today? Supporting Zionism means promoting the continued existence of a Jewish state, upholding the right of Jews to live freely in their historic homeland. Okay, so you can read and I can read. Hope that will help set at least a bit of a context for today, the way the term is used. Now, we hear the term quite a bit these days. I watched the news yesterday. Somebody had gone into a retail store, and right there, a big statement on the counter said, Zionists are not welcome here. So the term is around. And the reason I say that is a term that has developed in the last couple of decades with increasing frequency is the term anti-Zionism. Raise your hand, you've all heard it, right? So you have Zionism and anti-Zionism. As we'll learn today, there's Semiticism, or the Semitics, and then there would become anti-Semitism. All right, the 19th century, European nation states and Jews. If you fall asleep in the next 2 minutes, I will understand. So a question arose as Europe was on this full-fledged program of modernization. So many things about modern life for us in this country and in Europe is a result of the 19th century developments, the modern era. And one of the questions that arose in various European societies was, could Jews be full citizens in a modern state where you have everybody has subject to the law, they have rights, elections, and so forth. And it was in discussion commonly called the Jewish question. I'm not kidding you. That was the sort of the shorthand term for it. Some of you will, of course, have heard that term. Second bullet point there, it has a long history in Europe where Jews were variously limited, ostracized, or periodically expelled. That kind of history we won't go over in any detail, but I think many of you will know bits and pieces of that. I hate to put it this way, but I think it is fair that the broadest prejudice historically rooted in the medieval period was theological. The church of Europe was prejudiced against Jews in a variety of ways. But forms of social prejudice would follow in modernity. You have a separation of church and state and so forth, but still certain kind of prejudices will continue. Now, Bill, this is a carving on the outside of the city church in Wittenberg, Germany. It's a little dark, but it's that photo was taken in 2020. Maybe it's down now, but it goes back for several generations. Just an illustration of medieval prejudice is what I want you to see. That is a sow, a pig. Everybody with me? I know it's kind of dark. And there are several human beings suckling with the sow. They are Jews. And, Bill, I'm sorry, somebody has lifted the tail on the rear end of the sow and is appearing at the anal pore. That will be another Jew. That's a hard thing to see. It's simply one extreme example of a inherited prejudice. That's the reason I want you to see it. Can I go on? Okay. So this question, how do we have full citizenship for members of our society, Jewish and otherwise, but the Jewish question was a long-standing discussion. So 1844, just to take a little sliver, a man named Karl Marx. Raise your hand, friends. I'm trying to stay in touch with you. We all know Karl Marx's name, right? So he engaged another person in a question on whether Jews should be granted full civil and political rights. That was the discussion behind the Jewish question. And Bauer had proposed that Jews should abandon their religion. That would make it better and easier for them to become full members of a modern state, because the modern state would separate church and state and religion, etc. Marx did not agree with that. He said that we should have a complete separation of religion and state, so much so that Jews should be included as full citizens. It's the last bullet point that we need to look at for a moment. So Marx equated Jews with capitalism and greed. Remember, he was very anti-capitalist. He's the father of communism, right, friends? But he argued that people equated Jews with capitalism and greed, and that Jews and others should be emancipated from capitalism. Of course, he believed that for everybody. Everybody should be emancipated from capitalism. I'm not advocating that. Don't shoot the messenger. That was part of the discussion. What I want you to see in terms of being a visual learner, which is what I am, the book on the right. It's Karl Marx. It's in German. And the title of the pamphlet that he wrote was About or On the Jewish Question. It shows you how common the terminology was. Okay, emergence of the term anti-Semitic. Ideas may be around for a long time. The actual terminology. A very famous scholar of Semitic languages, that would be Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, Arabic, Ethiopic, Akkadian, and so forth. He wrote a very well-received textbook in the mid-19th century. It was called The Languages, and it included also part of the history of Semitic peoples. Now, in that first bullet point, you will see there His name was Ernest Renan, and he said that the Semitic race, compared to the Indo-European race, genuinely represented an inferior combination of human nature. Now, what he meant by that is the Semitic race includes Jews and Arabs. It was kind of a blanket statement because they're both Semites, historically. The term Semitic language goes back to languages which are related, and it goes actually all the way back to the person named Shem in the book of Genesis. So it's a term everybody uses today. So a response to his very well read book, in 1860, Moritz Steinschneider, he was a Jewish scholar, described his Renan's views on Semitic cultures as anti-Semitic prejudices. Now here's an interesting, at least to me, an interesting thing. For him, an anti-Semitic prejudice meant against Semites, against Middle Eastern cultures, against Jews, Arabs, etc. What we all recognize now is that the term anti-Semite has come to be used exclusively as anti-Jewish. That's recognized by everybody. But this was if you try to do a search, this is about as far back as you can get on the origin of that term. Okay, so you have to trust me on this, friends, in terms of what you're seeing. Here's an illustration, just one among several. If on your left, right here, is a book by, it's in German, and the title of it will tell you about its contents. It talks about the victory of Judaism over German identity. And so it was an argument that Jews should not be full citizens in this emerging modern civilization without some changes. But what I want to suggest to you is the importance of the subtitle right here. And the subtitle says that it is presented from an unconfessional point of view, saying this is not a religious argument. It has nothing to do with church and Jews and the support of Christianity. He was an atheist. It really has to do with a social analysis, and he was not happy with how Judaism might or might not be able to enter full participation in the modern culture. Now here's something really interesting, at least to me. He was married 4 times, twice to Jewish women. So what he would say, now think about this. What he would say is, I'm not prejudiced against Jews' certain characteristics, but otherwise I'm not prejudiced. He married 2 Jewish women. He thought changes should be made for the betterment of a German identity. A political movement developed. It was not overly popular, and it had statements of its beliefs. So here on this side right here, it's called the Statutes of the Anti-Semitic League. There was a whole political party called the Anti-Semitic League. They had candidates that they proposed for running an office and so forth. Okay. So one aspect of anti-Semitism was the claim that Jews had manipulated European economies. Some of this you've heard, right, friends? Jews had been active in banking and finance since the medieval period, when the Catholic Church had used Jewish bankers to avoid questions about usury and interest. Should the church do interest or not? There were prohibitions about usury in the Old Testament or in the Bible. And so Jewish bankers were used among other institutions to develop use of capital and so forth. All right, that second bullet point. Some of you will know the family. It's still around today, the Rothschild family. See a show of hands? Who may recognize that name. The Rothschild family emerges here in the middle of the 19th century. One of the wealthiest families in the world, had banking centers all over Europe, and by Europe I mean including England, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and so forth. the founder of the Rothschild dynasty had 5 sons, and he put them in different countries, and they started developing businesses in banking in all of them. What I want you to see is just how the conversation goes. So this is a French publication. It has to do with satire. And don't trust my French translation to a strong degree. Le rire is the term for laughter. It's a satirical publication. But the cover is, as I described for you, Edmund Rothschild squeezing the world. Look at those fingers. So that's this 1899, and it tells you one view of banking and so forth. Now, some of this will sound familiar to you, doesn't it, about assessments of businesses and capitalism and so forth. But this was a blast against the Rothschild family. All right, friends, I'm going to check my here. Okay. All right, so how did Jewish people respond to this larger development of the question, which was put in public discussion, the Jewish question? They're talking about us, they would say. Here are some bullet points. One response would be to assimilate and integrate. We want to be full members of society. We need to engage in various citizenship activities just like anybody else. The more we engage, the more we'll become accepted and full members of society. And we will hope for future change. One of the surprising things about this is that you actually have a sort of a dual profile in several of your European countries. You have, and I'll use this term, assimilated Jews and assimilated Jewry. They might still live in the Jewish quarter of town, which would be quite typical in Europe. But their business activities and so forth, and by the middle of the 19th century, their educational options and so forth would be pretty much like anybody else. And so that movement of assimilation, a number of folks are, that should just continue. The fact now that we have rights, society is opening up, we should continue that track. That was a big discussion. Another one that this broader issue of the Jewish question, another track taken by many Jewish people, was what was called internal self-development. This is the time many of them argue that we should look at ourselves and rededicate ourselves to our own identity as well as entering into full citizenship in our country where we live. And two terms that developed in this that became quite important. One of them is the term self-emancipation. That we should look at ourselves and we should work on our identity and our contributions. We can take into account what other people say, but we should start with ourselves. Think about minority movements in the 20th century that you know about. You've got the external conversation and the internal conversation. I'll say this now because I'll come back to it in a moment. One of the periodicals that was widely read in Jewish communities that were German-speaking was one which was called Self-Emancipation. We're going to discuss our issues among ourselves. See where that will go. Related to that is that third bullet point, cultural and religious renewal of identity. As we think about these things, we should strive to improve our corporate standing, our individual standing, our family systems, and so forth. One of the terms that comes up, you know the term the Enlightenment, of which the 19th century was a big movement in Western society. There was a Jewish Enlightenment coming along. The Hebrew name for it is there in parentheses. You had the emergence of what was called Reformed Judaism, which was designed to engage the modern world as fully as possible. But then you have the rededication to Jewish identity and practice. And then this last bullet point, the political organization, pursue a national identity in the diaspora, that means outside of a homeland, or in the new homeland, if we could develop one, to develop national Jewish institutions. Since Judaism in Europe was defined primarily by language and nation. So you've got Russian Jews, you've got Austrian Jews, you've got French Jews. They speak different languages. They have a number of different customs. How are we going to rededicate that? Then this political organization was to pursue a national identity in the diaspora or in a new homeland and develop national institutions. And so the conversation comes up, would it be possible? Is it feasible? And then, would it be advisable if we had a national homeland? That conversation became front page discussion. And what becomes Zionism emerges from those last three movements, and particularly the issue of a national homeland. A phrase that many of you have heard before. Next year in Jerusalem. Right? Next year in Jerusalem. The seedbed of Zionism is here. This is a phrase that emerged in Jewish liturgical practice and discourse in the medieval period. It was not intended as a spur to Palestine or any other place as a national homeland. It developed in the medieval period where a homeland would not have been possible. But what it did was give hope for the future, that God's promises in the Old Testament, held firmly by Jewish communities, would actually come to realization. So you would sometimes, at the end of a service, or you might have been gathered, and if Ellis and I were in the synagogue, I'd say, see you next week. Ellis would say, next year in Jerusalem. It would be a typical way to respond to greetings and to hope, goodwill, and so forth. All right, now that third bullet point, friends. In the 18th and 19th centuries, European Jews began to entertain the possibility of immigrating to what was widely then called Palestine. It was a discussion. It emerges in the 18th century because of change of political circumstances, where at least moving there and buying property, one could conceive of that. In the medieval period, that would not have been possible. Remember the Crusades? So European Jews entertained this possibility. Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and segments of Western Christians began to say to Jews, we will support you should you decide this is something that you wanted to do. So this is a discussion that was in the public arena, particularly in Great Britain and the USA. Now, a quick advertisement for tomorrow, while I've still got your attention. When the discussion comes up about a homeland in Palestine, a number of folks have to make decisions on this, and I particularly want to talk about Woodrow Wilson, our president, who you may remember was, in his own terms, the son of the mass. His father was a Presbyterian minister. And so he will have to make some comments and some decisions about homeland and so forth. So just want to prime the pump for tomorrow. Okay, here is where we're back to the term Zion. I knew it seems a bit circuitous, but we're back to it. A variety of movements within Judaism, particularly in the 19th century, had a common term. The term is up there in English, Hovevei Zion. It simply means people who love Zion. It was a term for renewal movements in Judaism, particularly those who thought about renewal where one lived and where one might have a homeland. And I keep saying, well, you might have a homeland because, as you will quickly learn, there were several suggestions for a national Jewish home. Argentina, Cyprus, Africa, among others. But two shorthand terms emerged to describe these small communities. They were, and this is an adjective, they were Zionistic, and their ideas of renewed, emancipated Jewish life could be summarized under the term Zionism. So this is the terminology that comes around. Okay, I know you can't read this, but you know the teacher in me says you've got to have the right footnote. I'm sorry, I can't avoid that part about me. So what I have on the screen are actual photocopies of what seem to be the first two uses of the term, Zionistic and Zionism. And Nathan Birnbaum, who was a Jewish philosopher, historian, a very bright man, and he edited a periodical. You'll recognize the term because we just talked about it. The title of the periodical was Self-Emancipation. And so he writes on this left-hand side right here, and you can just barely see it. It's right there, and it says, it's a reference to a Zionistic idea. And then over here in 1892, he had a column on the principles of Zionism. As far as we know, these are the two earliest recorded instances of the term. So when you go to lunch today, what did you do this morning? I heard somebody talk about the two earliest. Okay. You've got it. Everybody with me? Okay. Leon Pinsker was a Russian Jew. And so his discussion on self-emancipation, if you can read this, I'll let you do so. It's a classic statement from this time on renewal and how we might have a national homeland, but the location is less important than the renewal and the community. That was his view right there. Are you able to read that? Okay. One of his conferences right there. (1884). Good luck at the dentist. The reason I give you that date, friends, you may recall that in the mid-1880s, there were several pogroms that broke out against Jews in the Russian territories. They were awful, and a variety of responses, and this is one of them. They had a conference, and it had that phrase, the lovers of Zion, as part of one of these chapters of renewal movements. Now, if you can read that second bullet point, you can see the discussion going on. This is before the term Zionism has actually become popular. Progressive Jews in the United States had a meeting in 1885. That's what the first bullet point tells you. And it says, we recognize in the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect. This is a great progressive statement. The approaching of the realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth and justice and peace among all men. We consider ourselves no longer a nation but a religious community, and we expect neither a return to Palestine nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. So that's one response among Jewish communities to this idea, what about a national homeland? Okay, the Blackstone Memorial, a petition to President Benjamin Harrison in 1891. You'll see the cover there, Palestine for the Jews. had 400 plus signatories to it. Now, when I say there are 400 signatories, some of these people are well known in American society, including such people as William McKinley, who would soon be the President of the United States, Supreme Court justices, members of Congress. William Blackstone was a minister, and he was quite in favor of encouraging Jews to have a homeland of their own if they wanted it. And so here's the quotation from the Palestine for the Jews. Why not give Palestine back to them again? According to God's distribution of nations, it is their home, an inalienable possession from which they were expelled by force. Quotation from the memorial. Now I'm getting to the Herzls. You've done well, thank you. Let me check my time here. A German-speaking Jewish family. You'll see a picture of Jacob and his wife and 2 children. The son is Theodor, born Benjamin. They call him Theodor. He was born in 1860. A wonderful classic illustration of an assimilated Jewish family. Jacob would qualify as somebody, as a multimillionaire in today's economy. He's a very successful businessman. Now, because of long inherited patterns, they lived in the Jewish quarter. Dressed just like anybody else, right? They took advantage of citizenship rights and so forth. So Theodore was born in 1860. He has a sister who was just a little older than he, and she died suddenly in 1878, and the family moved from Budapest to Vienna. He was a university student, a journalist, and a young intellectual. So he was able, by this time, he could enroll in the universities like anybody else. There were no quotas, no exclusion clauses. And so he studied law at the University of Vienna. He worked for a while in Salzburg and so forth. Very, very bright. He loved to write. He wrote plays. He became a reporter, a very successful reporter, I might add, as a young man. He worked, the second bullet point, he worked for the New Free Press, which was the best-known newspaper in Vienna, a great city, as all of you will recognize. He traveled all around as a correspondent. For a time, Paris was his home base. So he worked as a reporter and an editor for various publications for the duration of his professional life. All right, now, some of you will know this term, the Dreyfus case. Dreyfus was an army officer, he's Jewish, in the French army. And it was discovered that some secrets, some military documents had gotten into the hands of the Germans. Who is the turncoat? Alfred Dreyfus was accused of giving that information over, of being a traitor. The trial, the retrial, the conviction, the exoneration, it went on for years. And it exposed lots of tensions in society. Everybody had an opinion on it. Can you imagine? They all had an opinion on it. And part of this, I'll just say this quickly, and you will smile when I say this and put it this way. Whatever the crime was, the cover-up was worse. It turned out somebody framed him, and they didn't want to admit it, and it just spiraled from there. But what it did was expose a lot of both latent and explicit anti-Semitism in the new modern Europe. And so the Dreyfus affair is very important for that. Okay, we're going to take a break. One last thing here. Here is a political poster for a French anti-Semitic candidate. He's running on the anti-Semitism party platform. He's running for office. And his name was Villette, and He wanted to win a local election, and he thought that the best way to do that would be to oppose the influence of Jews in our society. So this is the context from which, as we get started, and I'm going to have a 10-minute break, where Herzl is going to write an epoch-making pamphlet called The Jewish State. Take a short break. I'm going to get a swallow of water, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. There? How are you?